Hi everyone and welcome back. We started the benchmark for the DFI NF3 ULTRA-D with the BIOS. The first page offers the basic clock, hard drive and floppy options. The second one, with the advanced features, is also the regular. The features of the chipset are also basic. Just make sure you use more than 65 megabytes. For the AGP aperture size, as I had issues with other motherboards. On the integrated peripherals, I like to disable anything I don't use. No point in adding heat to the motherboard. The power management, PNP, PCI, and PC health status are self-explanatory, although it's okay to set a shutdown temperature for the CPU. The Genie BIOS settings is the page where the fun begins. We're gonna set the memory latency to the values we had before. The problem with the DFI, or the RAM more likely, is that the TRCD option cannot be set to the value of 2, and it defaults to 3. Maybe it's time for me to look for some old RAM. But we can set the memory timings to 1. That's the command rate. And we're gonna leave everything else the way it was. This is the first motherboard from what I've tested where I can see the AGP frequency in the BIOS. Also, by looking at the voltage available for the memory, you instantly understand that this is an overclocker's motherboard. And now we go to the info. Unfortunately, there's no Athlon 64 with 130 nanometer, similar to what the old AthlonXP and the Pentium 4 had. The level 2 cache stands at 512K, on equal terms with the older CPUs. But now we have SSE 1, 2 and 3 and X64, matching the Pentium 4 and surpassing it. As you can see, the mainboard tab has in the model information a typo for the motherboard. This one is called ULTRA-D. The motherboard is not a clone, and I suspect the BIOS, that is set to the latest version released by the manufacturer. If anyone has any idea about this one, please leave a message. Starting with this motherboard, I'm going with a different approach to the tests. If the test has never been ran before, I will let it run in full. If it was, I'm gonna let it run for only the last 15 to 20 seconds. So if anything is wrong with it, someone may notice. And by this, I mean frame limiters, driver issues, and so on. And now we skip into PC Mark 2002. And here are the results. The CPU score is a bit disappointing, but let's continue with the other tests and see which part of the CPU is responsible for this behavior. We continue with the tests in Sandra 2004. Here's Cinebench 2003, again with a disappointing rendering time. During the last comparisons, CPU Bench 2003 actually showed us where the AthlonXP was losing points. Let's try it now, and here's the rest of the results. Next is Memcache, with the memory speeds. Finally, before the GPU tests, there's lame encoding. And now we start the graphics benchmark with ViewSpec performance. We continue with 3D Mark 2001 and Aquamark. Next, there's Code Creatures and Extrude Threat. Now it's time for Comanche 4, which brings us closer to Intel, but still not there. Next is Unreal Tournament 2003. And now onto the quake-free benchmarks. There are some mistakes I've done in my other videos. The quake-free doesn't have a direct 3D option in the settings. Everything is exclusively OpenGL. The option in the system menu where you have GL extensions set to on or off is not for selecting between OpenGL and Direct 3D, but rather hardware-specific instructions for increasing OpenGL performance and adding features. New for today's tests is the demo called NV15 demo, a bit heavy in my opinion, even for the 4400 Ti. The NV15 chip is the one present in the GeForce 2, so it must be pretty heavy for that one too. And after the first set of tests, we go to the set with the GL options set to true. I also did some research and it looks like Demo 4 was popular back in the day. So I upgraded Quake to 132 and ran that one with and without GL extensions. Since all are OpenGL tests, I will try to phase out the one with the GL extensions set to true. This way we can directly compare NVIDIA and ATI cards in the future series. But as an advice, you can run the game with this extension set to true, as they seem to add some performance gains for NVIDIA. Serious Sam needs no introduction. This game offers both Direct 3D and OpenGL in the system menu. Return to Castle Wolfenstein and Jedi Outcast. Both are Quake engine games, and I made the same mistake with them. Again, the GL extensions set to true will be phased out for these tests. The direct 3D Far Cry test is the same as the one we've seen before, but the performance is appalling. I may have an odd driver issue with this one. And looking through the menus, although not present in the game, the benchmark offers the OpenGL option. In this case, the performance is even worse. I will try to change the drivers and come back to this issue in the final clip for the Athlon 64 3200 Plus. Next, there are the regular OpenGL benchmarks. Finally, we're adding some new benchmarks, and we start with the Direct 3D Fable mark, and we continue with the Ray Tracing Grillstorm benchmark. The last test we're going to be looking at today are the Chameleon Mark by NVIDIA. After so many benchmarks, I'm beginning to be concerned by the temperature of the video card, so we're gonna run some games without frame limiter. Joking aside, I think I need to change the thermal compound, but first I'll try to finish the other 3 or 4 motherboards with 3.2 GHz CPUs in this series. Let's fire up the games with Real War, a real-time strategy from back in 2001, an interesting precursor of Command & Conquer Generals. Next, we're gonna look at one of my favorite from back in the day, Colin McRae 2.0. And we're gonna run it with default settings in the resolution of 1024 by 768. The images are a bit blurry, and there's obviously a frame limiter in place, so let's try to max out the settings first. The quality is much better, but the frame limiter is still in place, and it's not in the settings. Let's try the Quake Free Engine trick from NVIDIA's driver. And here it is in its full 100 frames per second glory. The last game for today is one I've come back for several times during the last 2 decades, Stronghold Crusader.
Greetings, sire. The desert awaits you.
Unfortunately, neither MSI Afterburner nor Fraps work for showing the frames per second, so if you know a trick for this one, please let me know.
Instructions! Not enough goods. Not enough gold. We await orders. Gold needed. We await orders. Archers ready. My war is yours. Moving up. A message from the king.
Remove your army from sight of my castle walls at once!
In the end, the Athlon 64 looked like a strong Pentium 4 contender, and although it lost 200 MHz in a year compared to the AthlonXP, it looks like it gained some performance. And it's as close to Intel's Pentium 4 as I wished the original AthlonXP was. Still, the star of this video was the DFI ULTRA-D, and maybe some performance gains could be directly attributed to the NVIDIA's Enforce 3 chip. Of all the motherboards I've tested in this series, this one takes the crown for component layout, BIOS options, and sturdiness. Thank you for watching, and see you next time with overclocking and the graphical comparison to the original 3.2 GHz CPUs.